Hello and welcome to this week's groaning dessert trolley of military toy soldiers related conversation. It's the full 7 people back again this week for episode 65, I've checked and that's the right number, of the Madaxeman.com podcast. We're here with our normal bunch of painting chat. We're admitting what we bought this week. We also introduce a brand new feature in the amazing audio shape of I'm Sorry I Think You're an Arse, which is coming up later. We have a long old chat about morale rules. We also talk about what we played. Obviously lots of stuff about painting, but the best news is Tamsin is back at the painting table, so there's actually something of educational value to those of you who are looking to do more painting. So sit back, enjoy the podcast.
This means war.
Well, look, is this 63, 64, 65?
64.
64, unless I sneak out another one this week. So maybe it's 65. That's pretty good. But, you know, the increasingly popular, which may or may not be true, Madaxeman podcast hits, I think it's 65 this week. And we've got the full team of 7 here, all poised and eager. All the little windows there on the screen. People look... Adam, wake up, don't nod off. It's not that late yet. Everybody looks thrilled and excited here. And who should we... Let's just dive straight into it without the preamble. Let's just go for it. Let's pick the man with a brush in his teeth in a kind of feral painting way in a darkened cavern. It's Dave up in Harrow. And Dave, take the brush out of your teeth. Try not to snap it or something like that. You've not been undergoing sort of surgery where you've had to kind of bite down instead of do something like that. Or what are you painting this week, Mr. Saunders?
Well, I'm literally just painting some Battle of the Boyne 17th century musketeers, and I've just discovered that they've got a load of flash on their shoulder, which looks like feathers.
So do you know if it's feathers or flash?
They've got feathers in their hats. So, I mean, I've been painting loads of these. This group I'm doing, the first lot have got feathers in their big, wide cowboy hat sort of thing. And then I've just discovered they've got like what looks like feathers on their shoulder. And I think it's just flash. But it's really weird. So I've got a brush in my teeth because I've got a file in my hand and I'm filing their shoulders.
So are you utterly confident about this? Is there anybody else on the screen who's got a view on whether people is it the Battle of the Boyne, did you say? Is it pronounced that way?
The Battle of the Boyne. That's me.
Yeah. Battle of the Boyne, Battle of the Boyne. Anybody else got a view on shoulder feathering?
The feathering apart from the kiwi bird, no.
No, exactly. I mean, I've just discovered, and it's like I've actually undercoated them and put them onto my little, because I paint them individually, and I'm just looking at them now, and I'm just undercoating. Well, just doing a grey jacket onto them. Gone. What's that on their shoulder? It looks like it's almost a moulding, but I think it's just a mould mark. It's weird as hell.
Could it be a chip on their shoulder?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, they've got an ammunition bag slung over their handbag over their shoulder, you know, normal. But on the shoulder, you know, because they've got the big frilly cuff things, yeah?
They've got all the ruffs and things, the frilly ruffs. But they also had a few other bits and pieces there as well, didn't they?
I don't know.
They shouldn't have. I'm pretty sure that certainly they shouldn't have anything sort of feathery on the shoulders.
Yeah, but some of them had the,
parrots, maybe.
Almost like
the
sashes.
It is almost like it's got a parrot on the shoulder.
In the Skilling Dragoons, they went into battle.
Yeah.
Fully armed parrots.
Yeah. That could be it. So, have you checked on the original website? Are these Lurkio figures, did you say? Or...
Yeah, they're very good. I mean, I'm not knocking Lurkio figures. These have been very nice casting, and they're nice to paint, and they take inks and things like that, and they're good figures. But then it's literally but it's not one model. It's one shooting.
Oh, I found a picture that does.
Have you found?
It's got a parrot.
Yeah. They have little ruffle things coming out of their shoulders.
Really?
Stop filing.
Yeah. Oh no, that could be a disaster.
Mr. Mannering.
Yeah. Is it a specific unit, or were they all kind of parrot
Regiment
shoulders?
de Douglas.
The Regiment du Douglas was that, or of Douglas? Wow, that's well. We've learned something. This is very early in the podcast to have actually learned something.
I mean, this is literally as I've sat down here and thought,
I've just sent it you, Dave.
I'll just block in their jackets.
They have like white ruffers and red ruffs. It's almost like you know how the admirals have the sort of like the gold that hangs down.
Okay.
But these are look like they're cloth.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, then
You've probably got an empty glove stapled to their shoulders.
There you go.
You've probably got some Ulsterman marching bands outraged that you would mock their uniforms with parrots.
And some of the others have like overhangs, you know, think 1980s suits, but without it properly hanging on.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it looks like. Okay, so.
Here's another one.
So how many of these little red people have you managed to do this week then, Dave, if you're doing them individually?
They're not red because it's a commission, actually, which is my first commission.
So Regiment de Douglas would be grey because it was French regiment.
Well, actually, so I thought the Battle of the Boyne was between the English and the English, or the English-Irish against the English Protestant.
They had all sorts of playing in there.
Yeah. Discovered that the Williamites army, and I've actually done some research, were mostly Danish, Dutch, and Huguenot.
Mm-hmm.
So,
do their accents change the way you paint them then, or?
Well, no. The person who's asked me to paint these has said, he wants them to be Danish, Dutch, and Huguenot, so he can use them in League of Augsburg in Europe and things.
So you've got to paint them very tall and blonde.
Yeah, something like that. No. So
smoking a spliff or something. Yeah.
Huguenots are grey.
Eating bacon.
Eating a lot of bacon.
Huguenots are grey with, pardon my French, but different cuffs and collars.
Right. And you can tell that at 15mm scale, yeah?
The Danish.
Wow, that's detailed painting.
The Danish are multicoloured. They can be blues, reds, but I'm not doing the red one because that would look like the English. Various, like a sort of like light green. Anyway, so they're like multicoloured, and the Dutch have got a really weird guard unit, but I'm going to do that last. But they're fun. I'm really enjoying it, and the research is good. Is a good laugh.
Wow. Okay. And you've got sort of Stygian darkness behind you, unless the lighting's just gone a bit weird. So it's just a little pool of light on the painting table. Have you been totally focused on these guys then, or have you done any of your own? Anything else that's kind of slipped into the table?
The feudal medieval Spanish are completely finished. Of that order we did with Legio Roca, I now have 6 crossbowmen, 3 officers, and 2 knightly buglemen who will probably never get used. So that's literally that whole army painted.
How are the Franks going?
What?
How are the Franks going?
They've been bucketed. They're back in the draw, in the Bisley draw of the mountain.
Oblivion.
Yeah.
I do occasionally keep thinking, could I do with some Frankish foot? Because for my close formation kind of hairy people who fight with the Romans, I always tend to use sort of early Gauls and stuff like that. But I'm not sure it's the idea. Are you waving a Spanish flag at us there then, Dave?
Okay, it's pretty good.
Yeah, it looks like El Cid. I can tell. It's a very
King of
fast-moving Charlton Heston being waved at us there, or something like that. Okay, so we've learned something amazingly about fluffy epaulets and the fact that there was a lot of bacon eating and spliff smoking in the Battle of the Boyne as well, which is remarkable. So I think that takes us seamlessly round the thing to for no reason at all for Adam.
Hello.
Hello. What are you up to? Has it been? Have you decided yet whether you're going to call them Dacians or Dacians?
No, I just.
It depends whether they've got cars, doesn't it?
Latte. I'm never quite sure, to be perfectly honest.
Actually, you're anticipating my what are noises section, so go.
Potato. But no, I am still painting them. I've sort of done most of the third batch, and it's turning into a bit of a marathon. There's quite a few of the batch. It's like I'm more than halfway there, and I'm not using a huge amount of my time during the week to do it, but they are slowly getting there. But they're taking a lot longer than the Romans because A, there's just more of the buggers, and B, when I did the Romans, I started off by undercoating them, spray painting them gunmetal. So that was all the armour done, and the helmet's sort of like all the sort of like that colour armour done. So that's actually half the figure painted. Whereas these ones, there isn't one main colour. So I've gone with white because that just gives a nice bright background. And again, I'm not using fancy techniques, but just putting the coverage on the 25mm figure takes a while. So it's kind of plodding on, and I'm getting there. But once these are done, I'm going to give myself, because I was thinking of doing some Germans, but I just know I'm going to do something different when they're done in the next 6 months or so.
Trying to think, did those cavalry that we kind of swapped, did they hit your post box this week or
last Monday?
Got them before last Monday? Oh, you just got them, hadn't you? Yeah,
I just got them. It's like I've nearly done a third batch of the foot. I've got the fourth batch to do, and then them cavalry and baggage and stuff. So it won't take. It's probably done before I get a chance to play with them. So it's all kind of fine, but it's grinding on. You know, it's a biggish 25mm army, so there's lots of paint to go on to lots of figures.
And you were
how many bases are you doing in total, Adam?
Hang on.
This is great radio, by the way.
Approximately.
Don't take your socks off. Don't take your socks off. That's not good.
About 30, 35, something like that. Yeah. But it's fine. I'm sounding really sort of like despondent about it, but it's good. They're coming along. They're coming along at the speed that I'm painting them, because I don't paint huge amounts during the week. So I'm actually quite pleased with them. It's all good, but it would be nice to do something else, but I'm going to have the discipline to get the army done.
And speaking of discipline, you were trying to make a sensible and limited purchase of about 4 different types of terrain and baggage animals as well last week that we were talking about. Did you end up managing to control your clicking and shopping influences? And
I haven't got around to doing that yet, because I would usually do that sort of thing in the evening, and I've just been busy in the evening, so I haven't had a chance to sit down and do sort of like wargamey, computery type things. So I haven't got around to doing it.
Okay, all right. So another straightforward week then.
This means war.
Let's flip around the screen to Simon. You're there on screen in front of a bit of a mini Stonehenge by the looks of it. But I know that it sounds like another order has dropped through your post box.
Yeah, so trying to be environmentally friendly, we've been leveraging delivery systems. So combining your order and my order. So Pendragon just arrived today, so some more paints. Seem to be going through quite a few paints at the moment. Don't know why, but going through quite a few bottles at the moment. The biggest thing I've been finishing up this week has been almost all of the Renaissance Ottoman Turk cavalry. So I've got 8 bases of heavy cavalry, the Capoculi with the nobility with lances, banners, and stuff like that. 3 generals, and the last of the Janissary units. So they've all been now painted and got their banners on. Just have to do the basing this week, and then those mounted and done. What I've got left is just the medium cavalry, who will all be slightly underdressed compared to the nobility, just so you can really see guys with armor, guys with really big armor, and medium cavalry with no armor, but they're slightly bigger than light horse.
Did you manage to keep that momentum with doing simple to paint but effective patterns on that you started with the nobles? You know, sort of collections of little spots and things like that. Did you manage to keep the variety going over 8 bases, or how was that side of it?
I've kept a consistent design all the way through. So it's either 4 dots to give like a diamond on some of the horse's flanks, or a couple of diamonds, just actual lines with a couple of dots either side, just little chevrons in different patterns. So they are 15 mil, so unless you get really close, you're not going to be able to spot the difference. But when you sort of look at it, it'll give you that nice effect of quite interesting looking cavalry rather than a guy with a big horse and a red barding. So
yeah,
just more different compared to some other stuff.
Okay, and anything else interesting kind of in the post that's slipped through the net this week, or are you just waiting on the Pendragon stuff?
I've just been waiting on the Pendragon stuff, so I'm trying to be good at the moment. But yeah, so I'm normally trying to save my money up for. We would have gone to Salute in April, so that's where I'd spend quite a bit of money for the year's supplies. So I'm going to save myself up to do the same thing, but just done by delivery anyway.
Okay, that makes sense. Well, let's keep going around then. So Tamsin, now that you're marooned in London for a while, unless you've managed to do some very effective internet shopping and bought another house in the last week, have you what has come back out of the packaging crates and made it onto the painting table?
Well, I did say last week that I'd started painting 6mm ACW cavalry. Got the horses done, just doing a bit here and there. Got the horses finished. So it's just riders to do. There's about 105 figures on the table.
That's a lot.
It's a lot, but they're small.
Yeah, I realise that. I once drove myself nearly mad painting a Confederate 6mm army. But you do Union or Confederate figures?
Union at the moment.
Yeah, well, that kind of
similar number of Confederate cavalry to do.
Yeah, because they're a lot more varied, aren't they? You've got to sort of vary the colour of the uniforms and the hats and all that kind of stuff.
That's enough.
Yeah, that's not too much a problem to do. Like,
yeah.
So what's your kind of mass technique then with 6mm ACW stuff? Because I guess I do know, with 6mm, it's halfway between technique and painting style, isn't it? It's a sort of strange blend of doing things a bit differently. How do you approach them from the base layer up?
It's mostly go with a slightly brighter base coat than I would for 15mm, and then use a washed dark eyed.
So do you actually, base undercoat them effectively in blue? Is that your base coat, or is there a layer below that?
Well, it's the cavalry. So I actually did the cavalry primed in white, the horse colours, done the tack, the bridles and so on, the saddle blankets. So it's just onto the riders now.
Do they at 6mm have visible sort of straps, or whatever the word is, reins and harnesses? Because I'm not sure many of mine did when I did 6mm.
Yeah, the Bacchus ones do. You can actually make out the details of the bridle. So you've got the bit which goes around the neck, the bit which goes down the side, and then the over noseband part of it, and the reins. So,
good God, that's better than some 15s that I've got, I think, where you can't tell that very often. Okay, so you've done a panoply of different horse colours, and please tell me that you've not done them with like layering and stuff.
Some blacks, some greys, a couple of whites.
And then have you done that with washes, or have you actually done layering on the horses?
Base coats and then appropriate washes to
That's
shape.
reassuring. I thought you were going to say you were doing the Foundry 3-layer system on 6mm.
On 6mm, no.
No, not on 6mm. If they were 9, you might have thought about it, but
no, I might have thought about doing 2-layer. So 3
quite possibly
with a base wash highlight. Maybe does that count as 3-layer? Certainly not that.
No, okay, all right. I can let you off on that. And any of the bigger scale toys have made it onto the deck, or has it just been getting little chaps out?
I always only ever have one project out on the table at a time.
Good God! Wow. Yeah, that's
how strange.
That's unusual. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so might finish one batch, and then switch to a batch from a different project. But
okay. All right. Well, let's keep chugging around then, Andy. Obviously, it sounds like your washing spin cycle is finished, and
thank
there
goodness,
was a small moment of drama there. I think, thank goodness, is a very polite way of doing it. I think we do have to to tick a box to say that this podcast is no longer suitable for children as a result of your
was it ever,
Andy, you're not on mute instant from earlier on in the podcast. Unless I cut that out, we could always use it as the after thing, couldn't we? Just clip it in, just one little section, maybe do repeats. But what have you been?
With an appropriate warning, of course. Yeah.
Of course, yeah. What have you been up to this week?
Well, the last of my Renaissance stuff arrived, which was the heavy artillery piece from museum, and that turned out to be 70 millimeters long, which I found quite surprisingly large for a model piece of kit. So I put it on an 80 by 40 base, and I sent you a picture of it. It's got 6 guys and a pile of cannonballs, and it's got one nice figure from, I think it's Blue Moon, sort of on his knees chipping away at the cannonball to sort of like smooth the face of it. So I've got 6 guys and a barrel and a bunch of cannonballs. So it can sort of double as an army base. And that's the end of the Lanzknecht stuff, all completely done, every single figure. So I'm very happy about that. And so I'm back now to doing the skeleton cavalry. And I'll show you one here if you can see it. But it's basically dry brush and highlights. And basically each cavalry unit's done a slightly different color of plumes, cloaks, and shields all matching. So I've got a red unit.
Skeletons are not big on uniforms, really, are they? That's always been a feature of skeletons.
Yeah, well, they hang off a bit, don't they, really? Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Well, let's face it, skeletons, they're not very big on clothes.
No, exactly. Nobody makes pants that size, as they say. In
probably the supermodels of skeleton.
Yeah, it just drops straight off them.
Yes,
Andy, looking at the pictures of your gun that you shared, it reminded me of an old film I watched. It was Pride and Passion, where the Royal Navy's bringing a large siege gun across Spain, and they're all dragging it across and everything else.
Oh God, I remember that one. Yeah.
Called the gun.
Yeah.
Was that not called that based on the gun by C.S. Hornblower?
It's called the gun.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's just a great big gun that you've got. And it just reminded me of that film. I remember watching it as a kid.
Well, when I ordered it, I didn't realise it was such a monstrous piece of kit. But
you need a couple of mules alongside dragging it.
Yeah, well, they won't fit on the base. That's the thing. Your 70 millimeter base is just so big that you just can't fit much else on it.
Did you place an order with museum for one gun?
No, that was when I bought the Thracian cavalry.
It's a big gun.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there was more.
Yeah, that's right. And then I've ordered some more stuff this week from Pendraken for
it's
the
silent special. It's an excuse to get more.
Yeah, no, this is for the somebody put online about the Lardies O group battalion scale rules. So I watched the videos and quite impressed by the idea. So I've got most of the kit I need, but I needed some more British infantry to make up a proper battle group under their rules. So I've ordered some of that and a few other bits from Pendraken as well, and that should be turning up sometime reasonably soon.
Yeah, they're normally pretty quick at getting stuff out the door, aren't they, Pendraken? I think that.
Well, the email says within they normally process it within about a week, and I ordered some paras because Jeff Punchin, who I'm obviously pleased to know is on the mend, although he's still in hospital. He gave me some British paras. He had surplus 10mm ones, and so I thought, well, I'll build those up as well. But most of the guys appear to be in helmets rather than berets. I think
we'll come back to that later on. I think in a new feature that we're
spoiler, just an observation.
No, absolutely. I think you may be right. That's absolutely right.
I'm just laying the ground. I'm just laying the ground for this special feature that you might do.
It's good. It's almost as if we discussed this in Advance and Planet, or rather than just wing it on the way. But
Tim, we don't want people to think we planned this thing, do we?
No, good God, no. Well, I don't think there is any danger of that, quite frankly.
This
but
means war.
But yeah, I think the Pendragon stuff and the 10mm stuff's been a big part of my week as well, because I got kind of over intimidated by doing that 3-tone stripy. I can't believe I've not got an airbrush German camo, which is still kind of wearing to do. It's really good, but it takes bloody ages. And I just sort of thought, sod it, I'll try and do the British and component, which was just much easier because it's just kind of one color. And it was the really odd thing that I did do an army and I'd undercoated them in grey, but then I was going to kind of coat them in green spray, but I couldn't find any green spray or get hold of any. So I actually painted the damn things in British bronze green. So actually painting the main colour on a huge army, I think, Adam, I know exactly what you think, or feeling with yours, but this is just with one colour, trying to get decent coverage on loads of little tanks. And I think the thickness of the paint was a real challenge, because you end up, particularly with a light grey undercoat, you end up seeing the bits that you missed. So it did take a little bit of going back and forth to do them. But I think the thing with those Victrix 10mm Shermans that we talked about a while ago, having actually finished them properly this week, they're just really good. I become more impressed with them the more I do, and the more I compare them to I think I've got Pithead and Pendragon ones, and I think I've got some minifigs ones as well. And those Victrix ones just are really good. They do, you stick them next to any of the metal Shermans, and the metal Shermans look like they've just gone a little bit soggy, I think, which is kind of weird. But going back to it, I've got this whole British force with about 8 or 9 Shermans, a couple of Fireflies, a couple of tank hunter things, M10, M18, load of little scout carriers, some other carriers, some of the Butler's printed models trucks that you can see the printing lines on, and I've just about finished rebasing all of my infantry as well onto 40 by 30s with 5 or 6 guys on a little base to be sort of like quasi Flames of War-esque little kind of half squads to do that. And it's been good to remember that I've got some of these, and I think I might even try doing a kind of little BKC scenario. There's some scenarios for 2x2 boards, and I think BKC works quite well for that with its sort of random command thing. And then the other bit some of the other bits I've been doing this week is the Dacian heads that Adam, you sent me, and the other bits of the phalanxes and the cloaks as well. I've kind of got them and cobbled them together with the Victrix peltast bodies and shields to create some Thracian peltasts. So the peltast bodies are Greeky type people in little skirts with bare arms and boots and stuff, and then you stick a Dacian head with one of those kind of slightly floppy over caps on it. Is that going to work? Possibly not. And you stick a peltasty shield on it, and suddenly and you clip off the guy's hands and arms at the wrist and glue on a phalanx, and you're pretty much there. Actually, I'm
you sound a bit like that kid in Toy Story, the one that lives next door to Andy, morphing toys and cutting bits off them and sticking them back together.
These are all completely morphed into definitely bits. But it's the only slight bit, I'm trying to see if I can use some of the two-handed ones, but I think that might be beyond my modelling skills because the pieces just don't quite fit together. I've had a go at one, but if you look quite closely, he's got a very, very strange, I think, right arm that doesn't really work at all. But
so if you handle the ball, that'd be a penalty.
Yes, something like that. Yeah, but with the weather being suddenly snowy again, it's like I kind of got this half dozen ones that I've done a quick test run on, and I'm kind of keen to try and paint them up properly, but it's just not spraying weather at all, and it's probably not going to be spraying weather for another week or 10 days. So they're going to kind of sit there looking at me whilst I try and finish off the rest of possibly that it will put the Germans back on top of the pile to get done in that kind of Second World War thing. And then I've also nearly finished doing rebasing all of my 15mm Russ and Vikings, which got stuck. I've just done all the dry brushing on the basing, and I've put some different flags on them. I had metal flags that I painted on the old set that just looked a bit rubbish. And I think I found some sort of computer game that had banners for different factions. online, probably on Pinterest, and I just downloaded and printed off a whole load of these banners. Where's it got? Yeah, just about see that there. Like this one in the middle, they've got little Viking-y type designs on, and my new thing is to create a sort of a cross on a long pole, and by gluing two little bits of plastic at right angles to each other, and then wrap some black cotton around it, paint it up, and it becomes one of those sorts of flagpoles with a crossbar, and then you just stick a horizontal banner on the front of it, and it looks kind of quite effective. I think I did it for some Crusader infantry a while ago. So now a lot of my Vikings and Russ have got these sort of hangy down crossbar type banners, and they'll be done quite soon with a bit of luck. And then so yeah, it's been sort of prepping and preparing for some of the other stuff, but getting the Brits done and managing to sneak out and do a bit of matte varnishing. Although apparently Tester's dull coat I saw online has just stopped. They're not going to be producing it anymore, which could be like catastrophic, really. Well, I'll have to find another best ever matte varnish, and it's kind of, I think it's sort of starting to seep into some of the corners of the internet awareness of this. So there'll probably be much wailing and gnashing of teeth, or there'll be a run on it, or something like that.
It is really sad to hear that Tester's dull coat is no longer anymore, because I remember when that was first a thing, people would speak of it in whispers with awe, and a sort of a matte varnish that would just make anything matte. And when I first tried it, it was just like, that's magical. So it's like sad. It's like Woolworths closing.
And imagine how much more time will now be wasted on Twitter, on Facebook, on forums, on podcasts, when people ask that question of, somebody comes and goes, what's the best matte varnish? And normally now that discussion gets closed down within about 3 replies, where people just go, well, it's Testers. And nobody can really argue past that. But without that, there isn't going to be a kind of a no-brainer, everybody agrees winning varnish, I would have thought. Unless Tamsin, you've got something that you buy in Poundland or import from Guatemala or something.
No, I'd say I've never tried Testers. I don't tend to use aerosol varnishes.
Yeah.
Best I've come up with from that was, I think it's the Winsor & Newton Galeria Professional.
Yeah, I've got the Winsor & Newton one.
Well, I think Tamsin could do a podcast on this called The Lady Varnishes.
Oh, it's another good opportunity for the
tumbleweed
sound effect there. That's good. Yeah. I think we're almost all doing it ourselves now, aren't we? That's quite frightening. So yeah.
I don't even
that we dubbed it.
Get that.
Yeah, it's that quick. Amazing. But no. So that's been my kind of week, and I think at some point, possibly if the snow peters out a bit, by the weekend, I might do a dubious handoff of some of the stuff that I've ordered that's come through to Simon's house that will then just give me a little kickstart onto doing the rest of it. But kind of to round us out, Peter, you look like you've changed your background now, and either you've got some cacti growing out the top of your head, or that is a picture of winged hussars from a historical painting going on there. So which one of the two is it? Is it cowboys or winged hussars?
It could be the cacti growing out my head, actually, with the lockdown waiting for a haircut. But it's the winged hussars. You lot persuaded me that I needed to get some winged hussars.
That haircut, I think I saw that. Was it Gary Oldman in Dracula?
Maybe we can have a Patreon. We can have a Patreon to club together to buy you a set of clippers or something like that. Like, if anybody out there is, we'll put a picture up.
I've got some clippers. It's just I won't let my family near them.
Right. Well, we'll have a podcast with your family, and we'll come up with a tactic.
Dear God, scary! Yeah. Don't give them ideas. I'll wake up with bits missing. Winged hussars. So you lot persuaded me to get them, basically because, well, why not? And
we had to work really hard to do that, didn't we, Peter?
It was tough, wasn't it?
You did. You did. It was a lot of persuading. You know, I had to really twist my rubber arm.
Don't blame me. I was only following recommendations.
It's not a blame culture, Andy. It's just your fault. Okay. So straight question.
Marriage.
Yeah. Winged hussars. So Tim, you sent some nice pictures where they had white feathers. I found black feathers, and I've also seen red feathers. So what feathers are, and can I have some gold ones, please?
I got the
3 units, Peter. 3 units. That's the answer, surely.
Yeah. They wear red feathers under.
Okay. Dave has been inside too long. Anyway, anyone else?
Most of the ones I've seen tend to be like your picture, where you've got the feather support timber, whatever it is. That's done in red, and then the feathers are done in a combination of black and white. Because then, especially from a 15mm perspective, it pops really nicely. And you look at it, and as soon as you see them on the table, you go, "They're winged hussars," because it's very iconic. You could.
So you're gonna have a bit of white in then.
Yeah, but what you could do, because I know you like your gold, you could have your winged hussar with the general included. You do them with the gold to really represent the man, the legend with his entourage. They all have the gold, and the rest of the other units are just with just the red type of combination. You get that real visual.
Going to say, on the picture you sent me, Tim, the armor seemed a bit blingy, so I think they're quite suitable for me.
No, I think there's quite, if you want bling, winged hussars were kind of the gangster rappers of 17th century Europe, I think.
Excellent. Now's the honest question. Do they actually play any well in your rule set, Simon?
Yes.
And do you get loads of them?
You don't get loads of them. You only get about.
How many have you bought, Peter? Let's stop right there. How many have you bought? That's the real question.
Do you get loads of them?
He's looking worried now.
You can get a maximum of about 4 bases of full winged hussars. But what you can then do is you can have what they called faked winged hussars. And the idea behind it was you'd grab
like knockoffs from.
You get some scrappy levy, put them in some dodgy winged hussar remnants. And so people think they're a winged hussar unit, but they're actually levy, so they're just cheap and cheerful. So that's you can get up to 6 on the table, I think.
I've got a fair few painting testers, I'll call them.
Oh, okay. Right. It's good to have options.
How many did you buy, Peter?
Enough.
How many did you buy, Peter?
It's just there was a few packs, and it just seemed nice. So I think I've got enough for about 6 or 7.
No, don't say. Right. Next week's quiz question: which of these is a bigger quantity? Peter's surplus winged hussars or Dave's surplus Egyptian chariots?
Yeah.
Which is a bigger number?
But what you can do, though, Peter, is you can use your winged hussars, obviously, for generals.
So that's all right. I'm just going to have loads of generals.
Yeah, the Polish army had 18 generals, 1 for each unit.
Yeah,
fantastic. Well, my son Nick is on about having a go at painting them, so I'm trying to persuade him to have a go because he fancied the idea of it. So it suits his playing style, line up and charge.
Yeah, he'll definitely enjoy the aggressiveness of the Polish army. Yeah, walk up with all the foot, shoot, winged hussars charge, foot then charge in with a big axe and go. I've got Polish small food items like deli, salami, hams, and all that, and a big axe. Eat this, whack.
That's I had to get the riflemen with the axes as well.
Yes, you definitely have.
Very
definitely. Yeah, for sure.
I've no idea of the army list in any way, shape, or form. I went along the lines of, "Ooh, that looks cool. I'm having some of them."
That's how I design my army list as well. They're shiny. I'll have those.
Lots of shinies. So I think they'll suit Nick's playing style of line up, charge, and let's stomp the rest of them.
Peter, look at those pictures I sent you of the Polish military museum. Because
I did. And then Tim followed up with it.
Their original Polish winged hussars in their uniform on waxwork horses.
They had a bit of gold uniform, didn't they? They were a bit blingy.
There's just gold everywhere. You can just go big on the gold. I think
It's got to have some bling.
Definitely.
The only computerized war game I tend to play is a thing called it's Pike and Shot, which is a kind of fog. And that's got
World of Phlegm. No.
And the Winged Desires and those are quite tough.
Okay. All right. Well, look, that almost gets us onto the subject of what have you played this week?
This means war.
All right. Well, look, we're now onto that section of who's played what this week, and I think I can see a few people waving on screen. So let's start as we did before, Mr. Saunders. Which virtual army have you managed to get onto table this week, and how do you think it went?
So on Thursday, I played Simon at the AGLG Renaissance game, which Simon's come up with on PDS. And I used Low Country Spanish, which was really good fun because I've never fought with anything like with tercios or anything like that before. So, and I've got a massive win. Quite good win, I think.
He does that to suck you in, and then you'll be stuck doing Fog Renaissance. You'll just be, it'll be your thing now. Next competition, it's no more ADLG. You're straight onto Fog Renaissance.
Spanish tercios are really good. They're really fun. I like them.
Okay.
Why do you like them?
Now, have you seen that movie with the Spanish movie? But I think it's just called Tercio.
Yeah.
With Aragon.
What's it about?
Yeah, exactly. It's got Aragon.
Wide, I think.
That's okay. Then on Sunday night. That's last night. Sunday night.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Andy and I played a biblical game, and he used his Hebrew army, and I used Saitic Egyptian with the hoplites, with the armoured hoplites. And
was that one of the lists we discussed on the podcast?
It was indeed, yeah, it was, yeah. So I gave that a go, and absolutely stomped the Hebrew army. Ran straight through his heavy chariots with my heavy chariots in the blaze of glory.
Still.
Yeah.
And the armoured hoplites managed to beat the elite Meshwesh impetuous infantry, which is quite interesting.
Well, I suppose if they withstand that first rush, they suddenly get into a war of attrition that they should win, really, shouldn't they? But
I think it's more a case of if they throw lots of sixes and my opponent rolls lots of ones, they win.
Okay, so that wasn't something we talked about in the podcast when we were talking about list design. Then, no. Okay, so Andy, what from your point of view, your Hebrew Meshwesh, was it, or didn't manage to do the business?
Hebrew with Libyan Egyptian allies, and Libyan Egyptian I had 4 units of elite heavy impetuous swordsmen, the Meshwesh, and in 3 combats where they were up, they lost every one. So that turned sour fairly quickly, and in the meantime, Dave outdiced me in the fight of the chariots, and it all went pear-shaped very, very quickly.
So which of the biblical armies did you use then? Is that because I've seen there's some biblical armies in Tabletop Simulator. Did you manage to find some sort of proper-ish troops, or
no? They were all kind of cobbled together. The heavy chariots are basically Indians,
right? Okay,
and the light chariot division.
Yeah, it's cobbled together with Indian chariots, and I used a bit of Achaemenid and Hellenistic, so you just create a saved object with each command, I think it was.
I was going to say, how hard is it to create a unit on there?
Well, you don't create the unit; you just copy units that are already created from different armies, and
no, that's what I mean. Creating a new image.
You need some proper skills and a proper bit of software to do it. It's beyond all of us by quite some margin, and I've got some time on my hands, and I'm still not going. No, that's not something I want to be having a go at. Really,
it's not one of those things you can use Microsoft Paintbrush or things like that.
No,
you actually need the proper 3D rendering software and skills.
And maybe even to read the manual. It doesn't sound like something you can just stumble through and and copy some code that already exists either. It looks like the real deal. So
Can't be a script kiddie. You've just got to actually do stuff. Okay.
You've actually got to know stuff. Yeah. Which
something for your children to do for us.
I would do, but they'd probably hack it.
Yeah, yeah. But I've been finding some of the other bits and pieces. I think, Simon, I sent you some of the Renaissance stuff. In fact, you had a game as well this week.
Yeah, the only game I had was against Mr. Saunders, where it was looking all brilliant for me until I started manoeuvring, and it was a good way to see what a slightly more evil player will do, and then you expose one of your flanks to that evil player.
So you left a flank hanging.
Yeah. What, you mean the guy who was talking about loving hitting people on the flanks on the last podcast?
Yeah. Yeah, so I got a little, we had, it was a game of around 1600 AD, so they had the big Spanish tercios, big units, and I brought in the Dutch Rebellion, so it was the first of the pike shot units. So musket versus arquebus, but I had a lot more flexibility. He had the bigger units. And we both had crap mounted, so there was no of the big cuirassier units yet. It was all still lighter gendarme type of ones. I had a bit more artillery. Dave didn't. And on one flank, my mounted wing pushed off his caracol units, so I thought I had a bit of a run. I could see Dave's artillery units. I thought, I'll have that. And got a little bit too enthusiastic, exposed the flank of the mounted. Dave's mounted then turned around, charged me, blew through that whole wing, mounted wing, and proceeded to chomp through the rest of the army quite effectively.
Masterful use of my cavalry wing. It really was masterful.
So that's always good then if you can swing round on a wing and do it. So okay then. Well, look, I think that's that looks like that's covered off all the gaming for this week.
This means war.
So look, we're always keen at episode 65 to introduce new features because it feels like a decade since we did the thing about Napoleon. I don't think we've come up with anything new since then. But we've got a new theory, and this is a whole new section on it called. Well, I think rather than introduce it ourselves, I think I'll just sit back and let the music do the talking. Coming up next on Madaxeman Radio, it's I'm Sorry, I Think You're an Arse, the antidote to informed discussion shows. At the piano this week is Scott Joplin, and your chairman is Sir Humphrey Humphreyson. Hello and welcome everybody to this week's edition of I'm Sorry, I Think You're an Arse. You join us this week from the Charles Fulbrook Leggett Assembly Hall in Bishop's Itchington in Shakespeare's Warwickshire. Located here in the heart of England, visitors who climb to the top of a nearby hill are greeted with a view covering 7 different counties, and on a clear day it is said you can sometimes even catch a sight of Birmingham off in the distance, despite the many prominent warning signs advising against this. So look, the way this works is there's been some stuff that's been bugging me particularly, and I've got a theory about what isn't working, and I just want to pitch it to all of you guys and girls and see if you agree with me, really, because one thing that irritates me, particularly with doing these 10mm or rebasing all of these 10mm British, and I've got a lot of British paras, and I've got the little things that the paras do around. They're riding around on motorcycles. They've got these really cool Jeeps. I've got these Jeeps from Pithead with some really cool guys hanging off the back of them. It's really dynamic, and British paras, it's Arnhem, it's a bridge too far. You want all of the figures to look a bit like Sean Connery, apart from the ones that look like the other actors who are in it, whose names escape me at the moment. But when I'm going through, I've got a mix of figures from Pendragon and from Arrowhead, who used to be called Wargame South, and they're really nice little figures. But the thing that I can't get my head around is there's probably only 2 or 3 of the figures, the poses, that are wearing berets. And these are British paras, and they should be wearing berets, all of them, all the bloody time, really, shouldn't they? Because that's what British paras did. and in the film that's what you remember. And the ones which are wearing berets are not doing Sean Connery bash down a door, point a gun at someone stuff. They're all stood there with either using a radio or possibly the driver in a Jeep. They're not the one hanging off the back doing cool stuff. And well, they're not even the other thing they're doing is they're standing with their hands on their hips like they could be a commander wearing a beret of a different color for a different unit, just wearing kind of normal trousers. They're not even in the Paris smock. And then I had a look online to see if there's anything else. And even in 28 mil or different scales, there are surprisingly few British para figures with berets, given that's the iconic thing. And we talked over the last few weeks about Museum doing those really big shields and the for the hoplites, and then doing the hoplites in the 300 dress, both of which are kind of historically a bit nonsense. Well, clearly very nonsense, the 300 speedos. But that's kind of what you want. And that's a manufacturer who's gone, I know there's some sort of history here, and I'll bend that history a bit because wargamers want big flat shields to stick transfers on. And they all quite like the idea of the film 300 as well. So I'll create something like that and whack it out. And why hasn't anyone else done that for British paras? Because if I was in the British paras, I'm sure I would want to wear my beret as much as possible because it's really cool. And particularly if I'm in a film, and because that's what they were, really. It was all about film. So why don't companies make just loads of paras with berets? Because we just all buy loads of them. So that's my theory. And that's what's been bugging me this week.
Well, it occurs to me that if you're a para, you arrive in the battlefield by jumping out of an aeroplane. And
that's good. I'm all over you with that one. That's brilliant. That's very insightful.
Yeah.
I've got
the point is, if you jump out of an airplane wearing a beret, I suspect the beret is going to blow off and you won't have it for very long.
But couldn't you have like a clip or something? Can you clip it to your hair or something?
Well,
or
I think you'd be an arse, Tim. Yeah, you can start getting shot enough. I think you'd be quite keen to wear a helmet.
Yeah, but how many shots actually hit that bit from just above your eyes to the top of your head that a helmet protects?
Well, you lay down on the floor, right? Lay down on the floor, look forwards, right, and your helmet's there. Funnily enough, it comes a bit that gets shot a lot.
Stand in a slit trench with your head just above to shoot. It's only going to be your head that's up though. And
but this is the point though, the paras, because I've seen the rest of the figures, they're not, you don't buy figures for paras in slit trenches. You buy pictures of paras on motorcycles, you buy them running around, and you buy them perched on the back of a Jeep, herring around the battlefield.
That's health and safety. If they're on the motorbike, they've got to wear helmets anyway.
Yeah.
No, that wasn't in place back in 1944. I don't think it was at all. But what surely they all, and then when they surrendered, they all wore them, didn't they? Because they did have them.
That's because they get them taken off them. When they surrender, they take away the helmets and things because they can be used as weapons.
Yeah,
because all their bloody red berets got dropped in a separate drop chute, like the movie.
Oh, it was separate. That happened. There were actually several supply canisters dropped. That were.
It's just full of red berets, so they had no berets.
My Recce squadron, the ones that were in the used to be perimeter, they collected one canister that was full of berets, rank chevrons.
Right. So we're actually saying then they could have been wearing berets, but they chose to jump separately from their berets.
Yeah, exactly.
They had the berets with them when they jumped.
You normally have it in your smock.
Yeah,
but then they had some spares. So if they sent over a separate canister of berets, they clearly were intending to wear them and lose some along the way. Otherwise, if you're carrying it in your pocket, you wouldn't need it. So surely more of them than just like two blokes out of whatever it is, the 100 or so that I've got.
If you look at the historical pictures, the only ones you see wearing berets are in rear areas.
Right, Tim, can I just say,
afterwards.
Yeah.
I fully support what you're saying here, and everybody else is full of trouser filling material. Yes, because there are some realities more real than mundane historical reality. Okay, and British paras wear bloody berets, and if you're going to go,
particularly when one of them is Sean Connery as well,
and if everyone's going to go, oh right, historical reality, blah blah blah. Okay, people have been talking about painting Lanchenecks, and they paint them in the most gaudy, dressed up colours imaginable. And I'm sure if they could, they wore them like that. But after a few months on campaign, they would be in rags. Spanish Army of Flanders, tertiaries. Have you got that army, Simon? Is it dressed in rags? Because it was famous for being dressed in rags. That's a historical reality. But you don't do that.
But the big problem with that, though, Adam, to be fair, is that Sean Connery wasn't in that film.
Look better in berets. Sean Connery looks better in a red bloody beret. So you can go on about historical reality as much as you want. For toy soldier playing, I want the one that looks cool.
However, Anthony Hopkins never wears a red beret in Bridge Too Far. He's always in it, and that's why he's a better actor.
But does he wear a red beret in that thing where he eats people? Does he like? Because it's Chianti. That's like sort of.
Hannibal never wore red berets.
You can still have the command figure in a red beret. They just make one or two of them, so they stand out even more.
But the command figure's on a command base, and it's actually a non-player character. I want one that I get. That's Sean Connery with a Sten gun, because clearly all of them should have Sten guns as well. And there's never enough of those either. But then again, it's 10 mil. It's a bit difficult to see. And but there just should be more in berets. And
Sten gun range sucks.
Figures if they made more of them in berets,
Sten guns as well, the parachuting.
Special Sten guns. If they made more of them in berets, I'd buy more of those figures.
So Tim,
either airborne issue Sten had a wooden stock.
That's right.
Because it didn't work that well.
Simon, have you got you chip in on this?
Yeah, so I think I'm with you on this one because even though they might not historically have the hats, when you think of paratroopers, you think of a guy with a red hat. And when you and I used to play Force on Force, I picked up a whole bunch of British para troops for one of the random conflicts we were playing, just because they were, guy in uniform with a red beret and carrying a gun.
Yes,
how could you not?
That's absolutely right. Yeah, and that was clever marketing by what would have been Matchbox. Do you remember Matchbox? Who used to be I can't believe it's not Airfix or whatever it was at the time when we were all growing up. And they did one box of modern British kind of Falklands era stuff. And they were really nice figures. It was almost the only box of sort of soft plastic moderns they did. And I bought two of them, and I painted one up with green berets for Marines and one with red berets as paras, because they kind of looked close enough when I was that age to do them. And pretty much all of them were in red berets. They weren't wearing hats and helmets and stuff. So that's a company that nailed its marketing and was perfectly geared to sell to teenage boys who were watching this stuff on the telly.
So you're telling me you're going to start your Kickstarter campaign then, Tim, to do World War II paras in red berets?
Exactly. And I think what the business opportunity is to get 3 or 4 figures that are exactly the same style as every other people's range. So you have a range of 100 figures, divide into 3 or 4, or maybe 4 or 5. And there's some like Peter Pig 15 mil. There's some like Bolt Action 20 mil. There's some like all the other different scales, but they're all wearing bloody berets. And then I think people would go, I want those because the sets I've been set don't have enough berets in them. And I think there's a great opportunity
Prince
there.
to do the theme tune.
We could get Prince to do the theme tune. Yeah, absolutely.
So what scale are you wanting them, Tim? What scale are you wanting?
All of them, mate. I don't really mind. As long as their hats are red, they can be any old scale they want. But
well, because the Plastic Soldier Company, they do theirs in 15 mil with berets on.
Are they all 15 mil with berets? Do they have loads of berets?
They look to have loads of berets.
Right. Well, that could be the answer then. Maybe I need to start doing this in buy this bloody army in 15 mil as well as the 10 and the 6 that I've already got.
You're missing.
Well, paras were famous for being quite tall, weren't they? So it probably
but the difference between 10 and 15 is quite tall, isn't it? They're quite big and stocky. So look, that's my theory. But I think we've all had a kind of chat about it. Let's just go around the room, and the question is the answer is I think you're an arse, or I don't think you're an arse. So Simon.
I don't think you're an arse. I think the idea of paras with red hats is cool.
Dave Saunders.
Arse.
You think I'm an arse? Tamsin.
Berries.
Arse. Andy Finkel.
I don't think you're an arse, but I still think you're wrong.
That's a legal lawyer's answer, isn't it? Peter.
Thank you. I take that as a compliment.
Arse. It's just they wore helmets. They wore helmets,
Adam.
and then when they stopped being shot at, then they put the berry on.
Adam.
Well, weirdly enough, opposite to Andy, I think you're right, but I do kind of think you're an arse.
Well, as the elephant Death Star of time hits the medium-foot battle line of destiny, I see that's all we've got time for on this week's episode. So goodbye, and we'll see you next week on I'm Sorry, I Think You're an Arse.
Just one other bit. While we're talking Paris, only one range in 28mm by British Airborne has a guy in a kilt. There were two guys at Arnhem in kilts from a glider pilot regiment.
Well, it's glider pilots. That's different.
That's glider pilots, definitely.
The artillery that was dropped with them didn't wear.
I'm going to say it wouldn't be one of the parachutists wearing a kilt, would it?
No. That would be awkward, wouldn't it?
That's a short weapon.
Yeah. Is that your reserve chute, sir?
Or something.
I don't know, but don't pull the string.
Pleased to see me. Yeah?
And I've never seen British Airborne collections somebody with a chicken.
My first ever parachute jump, I did it with a Arnhem veteran who was re-qualifying to go and jump in one of the memorials.
Good. Is there any more to that story?
No, it's like he just said, "Follow me," jumping out the plane. And you're like going. It was like
talking about glider pilots. I was watching Antiques Roadshow last night, and they had some medals and stuff from a guy who had been a glider pilot in the 1945, and his glider landed in the ditch, and it was carrying a tank, and the tank flew forward out of the glider and landed in the ditch.
They should have put red berets on the Hamel cars, really, shouldn't they? And on that note, so look, I think we've survived that first feature. It's I think it's got potential. It's got potential. We've got room to improve it, quite possibly. But we will probably return next week with another episode of I Think You're an Arse. And whilst we're on that subject, I'll pay the compliment back. Andy, it must be time for your quiz.
Comment les voir? Question. Le trou est sans fond? Question. La légende le dit? Question. Elle dit aussi? Question. C'est une maladie? Question.
Right, Mr. Finkel, whatever your washing machine incident, is that still an ongoing scenario? Situation? Has that been done and dusted?
Thank goodness, yeah.
Yes, thank goodness, right.
Well,
hit us with the answers and questions, yeah.
Well, last week's question was all about mad science. And there were three questions. The first one was, what was Archimedes' iron claw?
It was just
that was the grabber pulling up the ships in the siege.
That's right.
Syracuse, yeah.
Land base, wasn't it, as well? It was on the dock or something.
Yeah.
Must have been a bit like those
harbour.
things you see at fairgrounds where you're trying to win a teddy bear and you try and maneuver the arm over and grab the teddy bear and lift it out. But instead of teddy bears, they were trying to do this with Roman ships. And apparently they did actually sink quite a few of them.
there's a
It's better than the teddy bear one, then, wouldn't it? They never work at all.
Yeah, they did a demo of it, didn't they, Dave?
There's a TV program. They're actually in the port at Syracuse, and they have this thing that build something to pull a trireme out of the water.
Right.
Okay.
I'd be more impressed if they pulled a teddy bear out of one of those fun bear things.
Yeah, that's more of a challenge.
But of course, well, ships are easier. They're bigger and there's bits sticking out you can grab hold of. So probably a lot easier.
It's a load of facts. It's a fabricated story.
Well, I like that story anyway. Right. Question 2. Which nation in World War I developed a steam-powered flame-throwing tank?
USA.
Correct.
It was modelled on the original British tank, but they modified it.
Well, that's right. Yes, it did actually. It looked like a proper World War I tank. And
so they took the First World War British tank. They thought the way to improve this is to make it steam-powered.
And a flamethrower.
Well, flamethrower, obviously.
Obviously.
I'm with that one.
Steam-powered thing.
Sounds brilliant.
Well,
Sounds cool, but I'm just not sure,
I still really like the idea of the steam-powered submarines.
Yeah.
Well, it makes sense when you think of the big steam-powered things at the time with the road rollers. And so they were the ones that actually had the best engines at that time. That could actually push something a decent weight.
Wouldn't you? I would imagine. Wouldn't it just be like bubbling coming out all the way? That would sort of give it away. I don't know.
This continuous stream of bubbles, like, I wonder where the submarine is.
Wonder where the submarine ever was. Andy, sorry. Well, let's get back to question number 3. Go on.
Right. Question 3. What unusual material was intended to be used in the construction of the aircraft carrier in Project Habakkuk in World War II?
Iceberg.
Yeah. Basically a stuff called pickrete, which was made, it was designed by a guy called Mr. Pike, and you mixed it with wood pulp and froze it. And this apparently made it practically bulletproof. And the idea was they were running short of metal, so they wanted to build an aircraft carrier. So they thought, well, up in Canada, there's loads of wood pulp, there's loads of ice. We freeze all this stuff, and they made a small model of it, and it worked. When they tried to scale it up, it didn't work quite so well. But to prove the qualities of pickrete, they actually had at one of the Quebec conferences where all the leaders got together a demonstration, and they got a block of ice and a block of this stuff, and Mountbatten, who was in on this for special, forces and stuff, took a shot with his pistol against the block of ice and shattered it. Took a shot against this block of pickrete, and the bullet bounced off and grazed Admiral King on the knee.
But surely it would have a sort of limited theatre of deployment, and a lot of the carrier actions in the Second World War in the middle of the Pacific.
Yeah,
it was for convoy defence.
North
Atlantic.
Yeah, the idea was, we want somewhere to land our planes when they're fighting it. But then, some design flaws crept in. People, because the head of the Admiralty says, we want this thing to be torpedo-proof, so it has to be 40 meters thick. And the Fleet Air Arm wanted to land heavy bombers on it, so it had to have a 2,000-foot long runway. And then they discovered that there's some kind of plastic flow or something, and the effect of this thing was that because of the size, whatever, it would gradually sag and sink. So to make it work, you'd have to put a refrigeration plant. But the refrigeration plant used so much kit that you could have actually built a fleet of aircraft carriers from the kit used. So they basically gave up on this thing in 1944.
Right, in 1944, yeah, when I guess, yeah. Well, yes, I don't know quite why it took them so long, but look, it sounds like a fascinating development.
Reading about this is just hilarious, but it's completely bonkers.
Okay, well, that sounds like completely bonkers. Sounds like a good cue for the next part of the quiz. So Andy, hit us with this week's questions.
Right, this week's questions are because we're having some bad weather. I thought these are all about storms. So question 1, which Norman leader's soothsayer was lost at sea during a storm, causing his master to say that if the soothsayer couldn't foresee the storm, he was obviously no great loss? And question 2, what iconic name from their history did the Japanese give to the storm which scattered Kublai Khan's invasion fleet?
Okay.
Question 3, in the year 255 BCE, a summer storm struck a Roman fleet and over 600 ships. And over 600 ships, including more than 300 warships, were sunk with huge loss of life. And what distinctive feature of the warships contributed to so many sinking?
They weren't made out of ice and wood pulp, were they? No.
That might be the answer. You'll have to wait till next week.
That could be. We'll have to wait till next week to find out. Okay, well, look, that was Andy's quiz, and in a remarkably brave attempt, we're going to attempt to have even another feature in this week. And after our sort of vague success of talking about one aspect of something a couple of weeks ago, it's not stuck in my memory, obviously well enough for me to remember, but we definitely talked about something in some depth. One of the things that's been suggested online, weather, that was it. Weather, and that's even the theme of your quiz. My God, it does all hang together, doesn't it? That's remarkable. But we thought we'd have a general, chewing of the fat on the subject of morale rules in wargaming. You know, and I think certainly over my wargaming lifetime, they've kind of come and gone or evolved and not. Certainly in the sort of mass battle ancient stuff that we do, but in also other things as well. And the world my world seems to have almost be summarized by moving from the 50 different factor WRG 5th and 6th edition morale checks that were a key part of the game to a lot of modern games don't really seem to have a specific morale mechanism at all. It's just sort of subsumed into everything else. Although there are some pretty notable exceptions, but for something that is such a key part of how armies fought or continued fighting or won and lost, it's an interesting or potentially an interesting debate as to why that change to not make it a discrete feature of the game may have happened, or maybe even, you know, that's me just having a very, very narrow kind of focus on it, and there are other rule sets where it does play a much bigger part. But I don't know who wants to looking around the screen, who wants to kick us off with a theory or a different viewpoint. Right, Simon, you've stuck your hand up there. What's your kind of world of morale? What's your morale history?
So I've played, you know, from quite a few different games. So again, like DBM, where morale was quite sort of abstract, but you had the cohesion type of effect, or the quick kill hits. Games like Warhammer 40,000, where morale, or Warhammer Fantasy Battle, where morale had a very intrinsic way the game played. So depending on some armies, they were almost impossible to break because they had no morale, where other ones, you basically said boo at them, the whole army ran away, which is great fun if you've traveled 800 kilometers for a competition. What I found over the last few years, I found it depends on what scale you're playing at. So if you're playing an army-size game, which I know we've talked about a little bit before, so say like an ADLG game where you've got an army you're playing with, whether it's on a 6 foot by 4 foot table or smaller, is immaterial. If you're playing an army-size game, you want the morale to be a little bit more abstract because you just want it to flow quicker. If you're playing a smaller, like a unit size game, so say force on force or ambush alley and all that, it had a very detailed morale system because it allowed you to reflect the very disparate troop types you'd have. So force on force was a game where you could do asymmetric warfare, where you could have highly professional, highly trained special forces troops or normal military versus your ragtag militias and all that. So you can get that very highly motivated, but as soon as things go wrong, they all run away type of armies versus, you know, the iconic SAS troops who go in, two of them, know what they're doing, highly motivated, you know, no matter what happens, they deliver the mission, get out, and all is good. And so really, for me, it depends on what size your game you're playing with, where you want the detail in.
I think actually maybe, you know, force on force, I think, Peter, you played quite a lot of Flames of War as well, didn't you? And in the day, and
Flames of
that was one of the sets where, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but morale wasn't a specific mechanism, but it was rolled in with effective combat effectiveness. You know, the higher quality troops were just harder to kill, were they, or something?
Yeah,
like that?
it came in a number of ways. In both, you know, from when you hit the tanks about their willingness to get back in if they've been sort of like shook up a bit. So, or even to the point of the army breaking because of the morale. And so it wasn't specifically called out, but it was intrinsically in the roles about how they'd actually receive different things. And it certainly gave it a lot of flavor. So you got certain troops which were, you know, steadfast defenders, and others that were very good on the sort of like impact, the charging in sort of thing. And others where, you know, you've just got a lot of troops, but they're really shoddy morale. I think the oddest one was the Italians, which you'd actually do a roll at the start to see whether they're going to be good or bad troops. And depending on the roll was how they could be, which I think was a bit extreme. I remember playing, I think, Clive once, and he had Italians, and they basically walked off the table before we even got to say boo. But it's very different. I quite liked it because then you could focus down. I actually remember winning a couple of games because of it affected how people deployed. So from the different scenarios as well, you had to actually think about it, because if people deployed the wrong troops to start off with, then you focused down with, say, artillery and targeted certain key ones, the rest of the army didn't want to turn up.
Was that a rule? I say though, the difference there being that morale wasn't done through a separate mechanism; it was just baked into overall combat effectiveness. Maybe that's kind of one of the changes or evolutions. I think you see that more and more.
Yeah, it's when you talk to like Hervé for ADLG, it's kind of baked in, for like heavy troops versus light troops, and slightly different elite versus poor. So as opposed to being a specific thing, it's baked in to the piece because, as Simon was saying, you have a bit more of a flowing game at that point. But it gives you flavors. I mean, I suppose you can go the other extremes and have one for each, but that boils down to the point that you'd want that for individual units, because otherwise no one would go anywhere.
Okay. And anyone else?
I think it's the change it's been part of that massive change in war games rules in late 80s, early 90s, from going from a bottom up to top down type thing. Remember when you first started playing, morale was seen as key, and you had morale tests to see whether the troops would carry on fighting or whether they would charge or stand or blah, 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 blah. At the time made a lot of sense. But I remember reading Barker's blurb to DBA when he was talking about, we modelled this and we modelled that. And I've sort of come to realise that, do we need to do that? What we need is the outcome, not the process.
But did it come from like role-playing games? Was it a crossover from the Dungeons and Dragons thing where you do morale test about whether you can do X, Y,
Oh,
Z?
no. The other way around. Dungeons and Dragons would have learned it from war games rules. Because war games rules started doing it in the late 60s, early 70s. And it was all part of that process of very early war games rules. You had sort of like chuck a dice to see if hit, chuck a dice to see if they die. And then it's, well, we need to model different weapons. And what else is, morale's important. We need to model morale in the game. So you had morale tests and reaction tests. And they've sort of, now I think games designers look more at what are the outcomes that we're looking for and how do we get to that outcome. So discrete morale tests have more or less gone by the by. And it's like similar things like any sort of like set of rules that throw to hit, throw to wound, throw to save. There are just better, quicker, easier ways of getting that outcome than throwing 3 dice. And I think there are just better, quicker, easier ways for modelling morale than a discrete. But because don't get me wrong, sometimes I used to really enjoy them. I remember one time I had a unit, playing sick, the unit of Indian elephants that I had to check to charge, and they went impetuous and hit some Aztec eagle warriors in a flank, and it was hilarious and it was brilliant and really funny. But it was like, it did slow things down so much. And I tried playing Shock of Impact a few times as well. And not only did they have a test to charge and the opponents had a test to stand, but you then had the 30-yard test to see if you test to charge home. And at the time it made sense, but now I'm thinking, bloody hell. That's like
those
three
shock
different...
of impact rules. Those shock of impact rules, you were going through like a list of 30 factors, weren't you?
But
you were rolling 3 dice to get.
That was seen as not strange at the time, whereas now, no wonder they played so bloody slowly.
Yeah, it was just running through that long list, and then it became a game of, can I engineer all the positive factors that are going to stop me failing this kind of weird random test? Mm-hmm. And then when it started going wrong, it started going completely wrong. I think some years after I'd stopped playing 6th, and I think I'd gone through 7th and was playing DBM, I think for real retro purposes, I had a game of 6th with a mate of mine, and I think he still played occasionally a bit of it. And the whole, 6 foot wide battle, and I had 25mm Romans, and he had some Sassanids or something, and basically he started the game with a sacred standard and 2 generals or something on one side of the table with his elite cataphracts, and they wound themselves up with all these pluses to get impetuous, which gave them extra factors in combat, and that basically charged in And then this collapse just rippled along my line, and the game was over. And we were like, did we used to do this for real? Was this a thing? And we were taking a lot of time rolling tests. But yeah, I think that point, Adam, about it's got sucked into that wider look about what are outcomes and what's important in terms of game outcome. And it initially got simplified from the old WRG 1 to 5, 1 to 6, actually, with the lots of factors. Then 7th kind of moved it to was it called a waiver test with just one dice? I think that it really collapsed it down. It was like roll 3, 4, 5, 6, and you're fine or not. And then it just completely went away in DBM, and it just got sucked into combat effectiveness, and there were no separate tests for breaking down this real mechanistic this is a thing, so we need to roll some dice to simulate it, part of the game.
Because imagine playing ADLG where you sort of like, you had a combat and you had your opposed dice rolls, and I've lost, so I've now got to do another dice roll and look up more factors to see whether I stand or whether I recoil or whether I flee. Right? Yeah, no, rolling. Sometimes I think, for old time's sake, I would love to have a game of Gush, and then I think, I probably wouldn't actually.
No.
In ADLG, I do like it where the elephants get tested as to where they run to. Now that's funny. I think Simon had the best win on that, where it ran up the hill and killed one of the oppositions and gave him a draw.
But I think if you were retrofitting old style morale tests into ADLG, you'd say, right, if a unit destroys its opponent, their friends who are on either side of them would immediately roll a dice each, and if they failed that, the number, they would drop a level or something, and it's like, so you're doing an extra layer of dice rolling and mechanics to assess the state of adjacent troops, when actually what happens is, now it's like, well, if you've destroyed someone, you're going to have an opportunity to turn on their flank and really screw them under the rules, or you're going to get an overlap, which will give you an advantage. So you don't need to layer on an extra thing of, and here's an extra test to see if something affects their friends or whatever. It's just baked into the core system.
But is that more that the systems are all acknowledging that it's all happening at the same time? Because some of the early systems I look at would be, we do this one, then we do this one, and then you can have that knock-on effect. Whereas something like ADLG, it's assuming that all these combats are happening at the same time in that group. I think then you wouldn't have that knock-on effect, and that's why you have it in the next turn, where you have the advantage of the overlap or whatever.
But the next turn thing is an entirely artificial construct in how the game works together. The point is, if you knock a hole in the enemy line...
ADLG's an I go, you go system.
Yeah. That turn concept, but the fact you've knocked a hole in the line does cause a problem for the troops who are either side of a hole. They are disadvantaged, but you don't need to have a separate dice roll mechanism to do that. The game itself kind of gives you a disadvantage to that. Anyway, so I think it's kind of been sucked into people going, well, actually the outcome is this. Or, the loss of morale doesn't need to be another random factor, or it doesn't need to be tested. I don't know, has anybody else got any other things to chip in?
I found it was, when I used to play Fog, there were a couple of memorable morale results, which I think tweaked the game a bit. I remember one particular game where it was actually Fog R, where I was charging some pretty average troops into some better quality Spanish cavalry, simply because I had to block a gap. And in 2 consecutive rounds of combat, I dropped them and then broke them. And it was completely against the laws of normal die averages, but it was quite entertaining to see it happen. And that kind of thing, when you get a dramatic result, which you weren't expecting, was quite good. Now, you might say, well, you could get the same with a 6-1 on ADLG or ADLGR, and possibly you could, but the fact that you went from no hope to breaking the enemy in 2 goes was quite spectacular.
Now, and there is a drawback of having the subsume morale rules. We're used to games now where if you break a third or a half or whatever of the opponent's army, you win. And that gives an artificial, well, I need that one, and that one. And your entire focus comes on to killing those 3 units, which is a very artificial way to try and win a battle, because that's not the way an army would break, really. It would sort of like crumble away. So that whole having tests rolling out might seem to be more realistic, but I'm just not sure it's worth the extra hassle. And it's also, again, generals don't fight battles like we fight battles, really. So having a game where that's what my plan is and taking them out, I'm kind of happy with.
Yeah, I suppose if you look at that fog, if you look at that fog model, you've got a combat outcome, which is 2 sets of dice rolling against each other, and then as a result of that, the losing side takes a separate dice roll test, and so that can either multiply the swing. You can get a lucky win, which is then compounded by a lucky morale result. But more often than not, the effect of the morale rules, because the morale rules are based on probability as well. If you get an unlikely win in the combat mechanic, you then move into a morale mechanic which is going to naturally flatten the overall outcome towards more of an average. The more dice you roll, the more average it's going to be. So I think it makes splitting it into 2 separate mechanics which have a multiplier effect on each other can get you some more extreme results. But it's, at the end of the day, it's just going to make it harder for good troops to really do badly, because they will have a sort of saving attempt with morale to kind of mitigate a bad set of combat dice. But you're still playing with probabilities, aren't you? But it's still a very literal.
It depends on what you're looking to model, and it depends on how much extra time and how much extra faff that adds on. Is it worth it? And if it is worth it, fine. And again, that's different for different individuals, and that's why everybody plays different games, and that's why we can sort of like argue quite passionately for rules that we like. But it's I think I've gone with the general trend of wargaming of simpler is usually better these days.
I think also depends on combat doctrine and era. So, for example, failing a morale in ancient might be different to failing a morale in a World War II context. Failing morale in a World War II context might just be hit the dirt and do nothing rather than run away.
Yeah.
And that might have a different dynamic on how the battle develops.
Yeah, it's when you look at the Vladi's rules, chain of command, I think I use the same sort of mechanism as sharp practice, where the individual units in combat, some dice will cause kills, so figure removal. The other dice hits will cause shock, which builds up, and when the unit reaches a certain amount of shock, it becomes pinned, it becomes less effective. When it accumulates even more shock, twice as many points of shock as there are figures remaining, it breaks. And then you have the overall force morale, where if a unit breaks or is wiped out or a leader's wounded, you roll a bad things happens, which can reduce force morale, which when you get to very low levels affects how many command dice you've got. I think that works quite well, because you could actually have it soon that hasn't had anybody killed, but it's just accumulated enough shock from enemy firepower that it's broken.
And I think it's possible to have quite clever, cute morale rules that do reflect morale without having a separate morale phase like that. Or one thing in PBI and in ideology I really like is it's a lot harder to get troops to move out of cover. So when you're moving around, it's sort of like moving through cover is fine. But if you then say to them, and they'll go out into the open, it's a lot harder to get that done. And that's part of the movement rather than part of morale. But it's quite a cute way of sort of like reflecting. People didn't like standing out in the open when there were lots of bullets flying around.
I think there's an interesting theory about looking at, those sorts of mechanics in the Lardy's rules, the sharp practice and stuff like that, is that what those mechanics do is they create a stronger narrative. They're less about here is something on the spectrum towards chess, in that you're maneuvering pieces around to get an outcome. And actually, this is you're creating something that you can talk about, you could write a book about afterwards. You're creating a story with heroes and dramatic events that have got quite a literal, and that's maybe kind of one of the objectives of the game, what the outcome is. You know, if you go back to the other one, I think we probably all played a bit of Saga being literally named after the Viking sagas, and as a game that, you know, I think we've all talked about it. It does suffer if you play it overly competitively, or if one of you is playing it overly competitively. But as a beer and pretzels game, dramatic mad stuff happens, and they give those dramatic mad things names. You know, that's core to the game. So I think, yeah, if your objective is to create a game that has a heroic narrative afterwards, having strong mechanisms based on morale that allow heroics to happen is clearly quite key. But for the bigger sort of mass battle games, that's not quite the outcome, because it's just not what you're trying to achieve. You're trying to achieve a sort of chess with a random factor component to it, of that way of managing a large battle.
I think it's quite right, Tim, because I think in Saga you're talking about the fate of individual figures, and you know, sometimes you've got a small unit of 3 or 4 Hearthguard and they fight really well and carve their way through the enemy. That's the kind of epic story that would have come out of battles when they were recounting it over the fire at home later when they were telling all their folks about it.
But the aim of the game is to give us that story to talk about afterwards, whereas it's not, you know, if we have a mass battle ancients game and the story is this unit was unkillable and carved its way through and, you know, and took down this, that's actually a game that we all go, yeah, they were just lucky on dice. That's not really it. You know, you want a game of my grand strategy worked. You know, I overwhelmed the right, I punched through the middle, this sort of thing. You don't want they were heroes. That is a good story. It's a good thing in the pub, and you do tell it, but we all know at the heart of it, that's just like, that's a dice thing, really. It's not that those little soldiers weren't particularly heroic in the real world. They didn't do anything more, and that's not what you sort of expect out of those games. But
I think there's one bit here that we've sort of touched on, but not actually said, which is the more maneuver elements that you have in a game, the more abstracted you need for morale to be. So ADLG, where you've got 20 or 30 maneuver units, having to do morale checks every turn, every combat for those would be detrimental. You don't want that. Rolling it into the damage levels, cohesion of a unit works there. When you've got 4 or 5 units, you might have up to 8 units in chain of command. Yeah, it's not unreasonable to have to do morale checks occasionally. If the bad things happen, rolls are occasional. It's only when a team gets wiped out or breaks, which is going to take quite a while. It's not going to be that frequent.
Okay,
yeah.
Dave, you've been waving around in the corner. What?
I was going to say, Bataille Empire, the Napoleonic ADLG, that's got a morale test in it.
And how do you think they work? Is it more appropriate for that sort of period?
We do it all the time.
Yeah,
we just forget about it by accident, rather than means, because we haven't done a morale test for years and years. I played Peter a few times and went, oh yeah, we forgot to do morale tests, because every time you get shots, someone has to do morale test in that, and I think that does bring the flame.
Yeah, it's basically to signify the whole shock of the bullets going in, because it was such a sort of like a wedge of bullets coming in and hitting you, wasn't it? And once we actually played the game properly, didn't we, Dave, and actually had the morale in, it actually made a lot bigger effect, because when you read the rules, they say quite often in that period, people didn't end up closing for the bayonet. And when we're playing ADLG, where basically coming in with swords and everything else, Hervé was trying to simulate with the Napoleonics is that, you come in, you put the fire, the amount of lead going along was quite heavy and quite enough of a shock factor that it caused units to run after a couple of rounds of shooting. So the fact of the morale and how they were drilled and how it was trained becomes quite a serious effect.
I read somewhere that in the Napoleonic Wars there were a lot of bayonet charges, bayonet fights, in that, as Peter was alluding to, before bayonets were crossed, either the attackers would grind to a halt or the defenders would run away.
No, that's going to be a chapter on the book I'm in the process of writing at the moment about the Napoleonic Wars, about tactics and the history on the basis of our earlier podcasts. So no, I think that's definitely part of it.
One morale effect I really like that you never ever need rules for in any game, but it does work in quite a lot of games, is the morale of your opponent. Because more than once I've been playing a game where I run a combat really luckily that I shouldn't have won. My opponents launched a devastating attack and just threw a 1 and I threw a 6. And after that, the game's still in the balance. It's all to play for. But because they've had a couple of bad dice rolls, they're like, oh, bloody blah, blah. And even though the game's still at a 50-50 stage, I've already won because they've kind of given up and they stopped trying. So you've still got your morale of your human opponent to attack as well.
Or they hyper-focus on one corner.
Try playing doubles with Ian Mackay, because after about 2 games, he's completely given up. And you're sitting there going, give me the bloody dice. Look, we've won a combat.
We're doomed, Mr. Mannering, doomed.
We're doomed. Look, on the... Well, I think if anybody has invoked the "We're doomed" clarion cry from Dad's Army, that's probably telling us all that it's time to wrap up. Really, that seems an appropriate time. So we've had a good old go at Chuntry about morale. Hopefully, that's been interesting, informative. We've tried our new feature, and I think I've just about got away with. No, I think on balance I was an arse, wasn't I? So we'll be coming back with that next week. There'll be some more answers from Andy's quiz, and
will you be wearing your red beret?
Of course, all the time now, and speaking in a Sean Connery accent as well. See if I can sustain the whole podcast doing bad Sean Connery impressions sporadically.
Can you shit?
Not going there.
We're just not going there at all. No. So look, I think on that note, unless anybody's got any final closing comments to throw in before we wrap up for this week's podcast. Other than that, goodbye everybody, and we'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Bye.
Yeah.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
Andy, you said you were on mute.
Mute.
No.
But I think this is great. We've developed a new thing for Zoom. We've all been on lockdown for a year, and finally we can now say, Andy, you're not on mute. You're not on mute, mate. That's it. Are we going to be a town council meeting or something like that? Is that the thing that's going to come out of this?
You don't have the legal right to do this.
Yes.
No, we don't.
As chairman, I said I'm going to...
You have no authority here, Andy Finkel.
That's the trouble. I don't have any authority.
Some section of the statutes of the elders and belts.
Right. Does anyone know a good divorce lawyer?
Yeah, you.
No, I don't do divorce.
What your wife's looking for?
This means war. This means war.
You're looking a little ruffled.
Yes. Oh, Dave, you brought it back.
Not filing him down, are you?
Brilliantly done.
This means war. This means war.
one of my pikes just popped off.